So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Vivek Jetley, who is the Senior Vice President and co-head of EXL Analytics and Head of Corporate Strategy, no less, for EXL. Hi, Vivek.
Hi, Adrian. Thank you for having me on the call.
You're very welcome. Thank you. So, Vivek, for the benefit of our listeners and readers, can you tell us a bit about you and a bit about the work that you do?
Sure. So first of all, a little bit about the company. So EXL Service is a publicly listed company in the US, and our work essentially focuses on two areas: operations management and analytics. And it's in the area of making companies more efficient and effective with the way that they interact with customers, with the way that they get processes done. In terms of servicing those customers.
Okay.
And the analytics essentially is focused on generating insights from data and using those insights to bring about these positive outcomes.
Okay.
Now, the group that I lead is about 1,500 people that are spread across the globe with a presence in the US, in the UK, Europe, Asia Pacific, and India. And it's been a group that's been around for almost 14, 15 years now, and is doing quite well in terms of the global demand right now for data analytics.
Excellent. And so, and what about you, Vivek? What's your background? Where have you come from? Are you an analytics data sort of guy? Are you a bit of a scientist? Or what's your background?
Well, I'm an engineer by background, and then I decided to go ahead and thought that programming was not for me, and decided to do an MBA from business school.
Okay.
I started off in management consulting right after getting my MBA, but very soon I gravitated towards consulting that was essentially related to data. So not so much in terms of organizational behavior or anything. It always ended up being in areas of marketing analytics or operational analytics or risk, and focused on getting financial services companies. Largely, that was my experience in getting financial services companies to be more efficient and do more with the insights that we were generating for them. I was actually a partner at a consulting company called Inductus, which was acquired by EXL in 2006, and that's how I came to be at EXL along with the rest of our team. And at some point later on, got the job of running the team.
Excellent, fantastic. So when we talked before, Vivek, you mentioned that when we talked about how you think companies these days need to create customer service teams that are both cross-functional and multidisciplinary. I can't get my mouth around that word. Multidisciplinary. Can you tell me a bit more about that? About why you think that is?
Sure. And I think of this, this viewpoint is shared by a number of our clients, and particularly a number of our clients that are actually going about institutionalizing teams that are exactly like this. And where this originates from is essentially acknowledging the limitations of a silo-based approach,
right,
where data and the people that work with that data tend to sit in different parts of the organization, and nobody really has a full view of anything, an end-to-end transaction or a customer's full history, or the full risk profile of a customer. To illustrate that with an example, for a retail company, for example, you would have an instance of, the marketing list and the prospecting list sits with the marketing department.
Yeah.
Once someone comes on and becomes a customer, that list sits with the customer service department. There's a fulfillment department that probably has their order history, and there's probably a digital team that's tracking those same folks on the web. And the trouble is, no customer sees themselves in that kind of a way. They all want their transactions to be exactly the same and with the same level of clarity when you're trying to work with a company.
Sure.
And then the second aspect of this is when you're dividing things up this way, you're actually not able to extract the full value of the data. You're not able to look at the full history and the 360 view of what the customer is doing with you and use that for generating positive outcomes. So what we've started seeing now is essentially companies are organizing teams, and they tend to call them either customer insight teams, or they tend to call them science teams, or what have you. But they are trying to generate teams that essentially are going at it from saying, no, let's take a look at the data. Let's take a look at the data or the sum total of the interactions as a whole, and let's derive the best possible insight that we can come from, that can be arrived from that particular data. Run the most scientific of analysis on it, test it, and then let's start putting it into implementation within that same particular team. So the intent of that is not just to extract the most out of the data, it's also to try and act on that as quickly as possible and reduce the time to cycle of a lot of these initiatives. Now, the interesting thing about this is once you start doing that, at least in our experience, what we see from our clients, the kind of outcomes that these types of teams start generating are extremely quick and are very measurable. So you're able to go back and say, look, I created this almost as a thought experiment, and I've been able to now show these dramatic returns in terms of the outcomes, and that then leads to an advantage for other teams to start adopting that. So it's almost viral in that way, in the way it kind of spreads.
So that leads me to sort of ask kind of two questions. One is that sort of team, that sort of data team, where would that, in your experience and in your client's experience, where would that normally sit? I mean, the fact is that we most organizations are organized in silos or by function. So where would that data team normally sit, or would that require the creation of a new function and a new sort of area of the business?
Well, different companies tend to take different approaches to it, and quite honestly, what we've seen is that it tends to vary by industries. So in our experience, with insurance companies, that team would almost always sit either with customer service guys, or with the claims folks.
Right.
People that are actually seeing the most amount of the interaction with the customers.
Right.
In a bank, it usually sits sometimes either with a risk team or again with a customer interaction team. The folks that are either have the most to lose if they get it wrong, or again are doing a lot of the interactions. So it's a kind of combination that we see across the board. But it almost always is a team that's actually exposed to the customer the most. What it's not is a team that's far removed from that value chain. Okay. So to draw an example, it tends not to be someone who's sitting next to the data warehouse and is the storekeeper of the data. It almost always now is closer to the business end or the customer end of that interaction.
Okay. And the second question that occurred to me was, you talked about the return, the quick returns that some of your clients are seeing. Can you give me an example of the sort of returns? I mean, don't want to name any names, of course, but the sort of returns that they're starting to experience by adopting this type of approach?
Sure. So the type of returns that we encourage our clients to think about is, if you put an investment in a team, you need to start seeing how quickly is that investment being paid out, and how quickly are you able to get significant multiples of that investment. So some of our clients have gone out there and put a sum of money to say, I'm going to put an amount of money in this team, and I'm going to return 100x, so 100 times that investment over a period of 3 years.
Right.
Now, that obviously is a huge return, and is something that that kind of shows you the power of being able to take a small team and then have that team attack a huge agenda. But most clients, this one may be an exception, most clients are actually very easily able to produce about a 7 to 10 times return on the team's cost within a year. And the interesting thing is you can start getting your first project's output within 6 months, and that starts showing you about 3 to 5x of the return already. And so it kind of illustrates my point about the very quick returns.
Yeah.
admittedly, these are small numbers because I'm measuring it as the team cost, but it kind of shows you the power of what can be done.
Absolutely, and those returns would manifest themselves in terms of extra revenue, increased loyalty, retention, advocacy, those type of things, and a higher satisfaction. Is that sort of metrics, that sort of outputs that are looking at?
Yeah, exactly. That I think goes back to the point I was making earlier about this being very measurable.
Yeah.
Now, usually what you have a problem in companies is, well, you put in the investment, but there's really no tracking of whether it turned out one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing about these is because it's always data insight driven, and it's very clearly defined strategies. The ability to attribute an outcome to it becomes very easy as well.
Sure.
And the ability to measure an outcome becomes very easy.
Okay.
Now, most of the outcomes we see almost always have something to do with incremental revenue.
Yeah.
Because in the business environment we are in, most companies chase up after that. But it's the others as well. Reduced claims cost, reduced cost of servicing the customer.
Yeah.
Reduced attrition rates, the ability of measuring an engagement score and seeing an uplift in the engagement score.
Mm-hmm.
All of those matter as well.
Okay. So, also when we talked before, you also said that you think it's important, or becoming increasingly important, that businesses build teams that have mixed skill sets that range from analytical skills to business skills, sales skills, and marketing sort of skills, and how this makes the team more attuned to the businesses and the customers' needs and expectations. Now, can you tell me a bit more about why you think this is, and also about, does this not logically lead to a potential convergence of customer service, sales, and marketing?
Sure. So let me start off with the first, which is, why do I think that they need that multidisciplinary team, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
As we talked about, when you are trying to tackle some of these issues, you need to be able to be focused on the outcome.
Yeah.
And you need to be focused on the outcome in a way that you can actually impact the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So first off, you need people on your team that understand the process and understand the business dynamics.
Yes.
So if our metric at the end of the day is, I want to increase profitability, you need to have people on the team that actually understand how that profitability cycle works.
Yeah.
Next, you need to have people on your team that understand your data systems, that understand what kind of data do you track, and not just what you track within that particular unit, but what's the data in the rest of the company, and how do you go about matching it, how do you go about getting external data and appending it, and creating a consolidated or a bigger data repository.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Then you need a little bit of a time from the data scientists, and this is someone who would come in and say, okay, your data analysts have captured all of this data. Now, can I opine on what is the best scientific method to be able to analyze this to get it to the analytical construct? Someone who can suggest the right statistical approaches and so on. Mm-hmm. And then you need folks after that are more your traditional consulting or implementation types of people that take the results of that analysis and put it down into either an actionable policy or program it into the ongoing kind of a transaction, so that this now starts getting implemented on an ongoing basis. So, for example, if in this whole chain, if I was trying to look at a customer that went from came into my funnel, so came onto my website, was trying to look for an item, but ended up not buying it, and I'm trying to change that outcome. You would need people that actually have the ability of getting that data, of collating data of what they looked at, looking at some kind of a score of saying this type of a customer belongs to this segment and therefore we should offer this. And then at the end of the day, you need to have people that actually can put that program into play, so that the next time the customer comes in, you have the ability to make that offer and kind of get the conversion.
Okay.
Now, that when you talk through that whole chain, the reason you need the multidisciplinary team is to be able to get to that insight, and then to be able to act on it in a real-time environment. If one of these multi-disciplines were missing, you would either get a poorer quality of insight or analysis, because either the data was not sufficient, or your analysis wasn't as rigorous, or if you were missing the operational guys, then you would, it'd be a great analysis, but you wouldn't be able to convert it into something that that impacts your business on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
So that, to me, that's the reason why you need that, and it's quite frankly one of the more critical aspects of that. If you don't have everything covered here, you're likely to let the ball drop at some point.
Mm-hmm.
The other question was, does this lead to some kind of a convergence?
Yeah.
And I absolutely think it does. And the convergence is kind of important because of the way in which consumers are changing their interaction with companies. You don't have the luxury right now of being able to do customer service in one silo and then do your sales and marketing in a completely different silo. Most often, that interaction that you have with the customer is both a service interaction as well as an opportunity for an incremental sale or an opportunity for protecting that customer.
Sure.
And that's where we're seeing the conversion is happening. This is not to say that there isn't a separate marketing team and, that marketing team that doesn't have a ton of work to do, but at least as far as customer service is concerned, we are seeing a convergence, at least on their point of cross-sell and upsell and what have you.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about it from a Venn diagram perspective, where it's always you have three intersecting circles, and that the heart of the team needs to be right at the very, very center, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And that all of that needs to come into play in that interaction with the customer.
Yes.
So all of these teams need to come together and need to kind of act very cohesively when that customer interaction happens. And it kind of goes back to the point we were making earlier about, where do these teams usually sit? And as far as, what I see right now is that they need to, irrespective of where they sit, they need to have a clear line of sight into this customer interaction.
Okay. Now, I've been reading a lot about these type of sort of movements and things, and it seems to me one of the biggest challenges of implementing all of this is that there might be a data skills gap. Would you agree with that? And if so, how big do you think that gap is, and what sort of skills gaps are we talking about?
Absolutely. So the term that's been coined here in the US market, which is called the mapping, and it is a tremendously big gap. We see this across each one of our clients, where even in this economy, they're finding it extremely difficult to hire people with the right skill set because those people tend to be very difficult to find, and when you do find them, they tend to already be in certain areas and unwilling to move. Mm-hmm. It starts becoming bigger when you're away from the large urban centers. So it may be easy for you to find some of these resources in New York, say, or in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. But if you're moving to Cincinnati or Cleveland, it becomes very difficult to start getting the right resource type.
Okay.
The skill gap that we see tends to happen in two or three broad buckets. Bucket number one is the data scientists. These are people that actually have the high level of analytical or statistical training that have been trained in terms of statistical techniques and can opine on the statistical technique and be the scientist that's kind of working with the team. Mm-hmm. Now, it was a very interesting study that McKinsey had done a few years ago, which estimated this gap at about 300 to 400,000, and I've seen nothing to kind of show that the gap isn't even bigger, if at all. So
when you say 300 400,000, is that 300 400,000 people?
Yes.
Wow.
And is that that number may have grown even in the couple of years since that study was done.
And is that just in the US?
I believe in their case they estimated just in the US. And I think what the 300 and 400,000 is my extrapolating that number to kind of cover the US and the UK.
Okay.
I think in their case they probably estimated about 250 to 300,000. And I can send you some of these details later.
Okay.
The other part, which is the bigger gap, is, and this goes back to the multidisciplinary approach, it's not the scientists, it's the people around that, the people that need to be managers that now have the right amount of training, that have the right amount of thinking to be able to start using the data and these data skills. So they need to be able to to interpret what the results are coming. They need to be able to lead these teams. They need to be able to deploy teams in the right manner. And that gap is even bigger. Conservatively, it's about 3 or 4 times bigger than the gap for data scientists.
Wow.
And finally, there is a third gap, which is of people that are experienced with or that are at the level of consumer behavior specialists or people that are operations specialists that have the same amount of training. Now, this is what in the old days used to be the Six Sigma type of folks.
Yeah.
But you still need that skill set. It's now a little bit different. These are people that need to understand the digital interaction channels. They need to understand the various customer interaction processes, but still have a very good quantitative focus and be able to translate those things back and forth. And that gap, I would imagine, is another 200, 300,000. So it cuts across all 3 of those levels. But the underlying factor for all of them is essentially folks with the right quantitative training and with the right amount of training in terms of being able to use data and interpret it in a scientific manner.
Okay. And I mean, I guess my question around that is, I mean, where do firms start with this? I mean, is it a bit of a chicken and egg sort of situation where you have leaders that appreciate the need and the opportunity and the possibility of this type of approach that need to start initiatives, but then they're held back because they don't have the right sort of people with the right sort of analytical kind of skills? I mean, what comes first? Is it the chicken or the egg?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one to solve.
Yeah.
But most companies have, and rightly so, have taken the approach of saying, let's start small.
Right.
So we know we don't have the ability of going in and setting up a 500, 50, 60-person team. So let's start small with a 10 or 15-person team. Let's have this team start showing us the outputs. And as you're doing that, you're building momentum within the company. And at the same point in time, you're recruiting and you're expanding your teams and going forward. So it's kind of an iterative approach that most of our clients have followed. The other thing that our clients have done is, while there is a math science deficit in the US and the UK, they've leveraged the offshore countries, particularly India, in this manner of trying to use that market as not so much as a cost play, but more as a talent play, to source the right people with the right quantitative training and at the right cost level. So they've gone about by using that as an additional channel for them to be able to build out these large teams.
Okay.
So it's those 2 things in conjunction, starting small and then building up the team iteratively, and using offshore or outsourcing essentially as an element of being able to get the right talent level into your team and build the right capacity. And that's allowed them to still bridge the gap that they see.
Okay. I mean, in your experience, what are the major sort of barriers to a firm or an executive sort of adopting this type of a approach? Is it one of awareness, or is it understanding, or is there something else?
Well, it's a couple of different things. First of all, there is that question of who should own this? So it takes an executive, either a business unit leader or someone in the C-suite, to be able to say, no, I'm going to take ownership of this, and I'm going to build this out, and I'm going to ensure that the rest of the units and the rest of the company plays ball. So that's where typically the person ends up sitting.
Okay.
The second challenge is, in most cases, and this is especially true for companies that haven't been sophisticated users of data. So, most banks, for example, already have big analytics teams. So do most insurance companies. But if you're out there, say in a company that's not been that data sophisticated, the challenge ends up being, well, how do I go about building this? So, even how do I go about bringing the leader who's going to bring that thinking in? And that's where the chicken and the egg situation starts manifesting itself. So what a lot of these companies have to do is almost settle on the leader and the plan at the same point in time, because you need to have someone who's done it before and kind of seen it before to be able to start implementing implementing that plan for you.
Okay. I mean, that's fascinating, and it Vivek, and it poses some major challenges to some firms if they want to, I guess, move forward and offer and deliver on the promise and the experience that they want to provide their clients by knitting together all the pots of data that they have with their on their customers. So it's big challenges ahead, but I mean, without going into it in more detail, because it's a huge topic and a huge challenge. I mean, is there anything else that you'd like to add, or any other sort of tips that you've learned along the way in your vast experience that you would offer to our readers and listeners?
Sure. I think that the big idea really is rather counterintuitively is to start small.
Yeah.
So, rather than going in for a massive investment which says, before I do any of this, I've got to build the best-in-class data warehouse, and I've got to build the best-in-class science team that I can get, and these guys are going to work on cutting-edge technology like a Hadoop and so on. Before, trying to get into the whole big data space all at once, you need to start small, and you need to basically say, am I using the data that I already have right now within the company optimally?
Yes.
Am I getting the most out of it? And most often the answer is no. And what companies tend to need to start with is essentially coming up with a cheap, low-cost kind of a pilot solution that helps you start putting that together and start getting the right kind of a business outcome from it.
Yeah.
Now, once you have that business outcome, that will start informing you, the process of getting to that, as well as the results, will start informing you about how much untapped potential there is already in your data. And in terms of the process, how easy or difficult was it for you to get there, and where you need to start making your investments. So my big takeaway, my big piece of advice to our clients almost always is start small, learn from what you do, and then iteratively start building it out. Don't go for the big bang, because the big bang, first of all, it delays the outcome, and secondly, it seldom works.
Absolutely. So, Vivek, that brings me to my final question I always end these interviews on, and that is this. Is there anything that you would like to shamelessly plug?
No, absolutely. Thank you for giving me that opportunity. We are in business of analytics, so I would like to just call out our teams. EXL Analytics now, as I told you at the beginning of the call, is about a 1,500-person team.
Yeah.
And our core strength tends to be in the area of predictive analytics and the ability to derive these insights from the vast amounts of data that our clients have at their disposal. We tend to be focused in a few different industries, but those tend to be financial services, insurance companies, health insurance, healthcare, travel companies, and retail, and so on. But what we've seen is that the data skills that we bring to bear and the ability to model these outcomes cut across the board, irrespective of the industry that we are in. And that's what's been our calling card with our clients, the ability to come in with a very experienced team, do so flexibly and in a cost-effective manner, and start producing outcomes for our clients as quickly as can be possible.
Fantastic. Vivek, that's been fascinating, and just want to say thank you for your time and for sharing your insights. I think that's been, I've learned a lot. I know that for a fact, and I'm sure that my listeners and readers are going to benefit from this as well. So thank you again. It's been great.
Thanks for your time, Adrian.